Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Okay, so this class we will continue with functions with arrays. So let's review what we did last video class. So first we know to use an array, right? Here we refer to 1D array or 2D array as a function argument, which means you want to pass in arrays into your functions. So to use it, you just need to provide the name without the box. And to declare the array, so to write the function, you will, so for the 1D array parameter, you will just declare the array with no capacity. So you still need to have the box, you just leave it empty. And for the 2D array, you will have two brackets, right? So one for the row count and one for the column count. You will leave the first box empty, right? So you will leave the row count empty, but you need to provide the column count. And we will use extra input to specify the capacity if it's 1D array, or the row count or column count for the 2D array. And the array will behave as if it's by reference, which means whatever changes we made in the functions, it will make the permanent change in the array. Okay, I see people asking, what chapter do we cover for the next exam? Everything we did till today's class, and we will have Thursday's class for review. Okay, I will post practice test later today. And I know that some lab instructor already give you practice question. So if you get the practice question from your lab instructor, that will be, you probably will get the same set of practice question I post. The test will be next Tuesday, so a week from today. Okay, so the exam focus will be on the functions and the array we did, or the recursive function. But you still need to use what we learned from the first exam. Or because everything built up from the previous material. Okay, and what we did now with arrays and then the function, that will be on chapter 6 of the textbook. So the second exam will be focused on chapter 5 and 6 of the textbook, but you still need to know how to use like if statement, while statement, like how to write the loop. Okay, and I see people asking, is what we learned today gonna be on the exam? We're not gonna learn anything new. We will just do more questions involving functions with the array. Okay, I see people asking what's the name of the textbook. There's a recommended textbook, that's the C++ Without Fear. In the book, it's on the syllabus. Okay, so if there's any question regard to the exam, just ask after the class. So all the format will be similar to the first exam. So you do need to join the Zoom meeting to turn on the camera. Okay. Okay, now if we look at this example here, so we already have the main function, right? So we have a name array, right? So we have 5 names here. And we also have their scores. Let's say we have their scores on 3 exams. So first we want to calculate average of all scores. Right, so we will print out average of all score and then we will print out the number, which means we want to find average of all the score you see here. So how do we do that?
Nested loop.
Okay, so we will have nested loop, but how would they, so we know we need to write a function, right? So our goal today is to implement all the function we see here. Right, so we have, look at it. Here we have the average function. And then we have calculate average function. And then we also have the curve function. And there's also a max function. Okay, so there are a total of 4 functions we need to implement. So let's start with the averaged. Right, so this is what we have here. It's the same. So what will the title line of our function gonna be for the average function? So we know to write the title line, we will always start with the result type. What the result type of this average function gonna be? So it will be double since we are calculating the average of all the score. Now what's the parameter? The first parameter will be an array, right? So I see people already put it in the chat. So we have int array. Now you don't need to name it exactly as square. You can name it whatever you want. So we can just name it array. Now to declare the parameter, if you look at here, to declare the parameter, we will leave the row count blank, but we need to provide the column count. So we have 5 here. And then we will have the second parameter, right? That will be the row count and then the column count.
Professor, question.
Yes.
So I last time asked about int scores. You have bracket 3, 5. So I understand that that's for the 2D array, but just wondering. So 3 is for columns, right? And then 5 is for row.
No, you have row first. You always have row first and then column second. So 3 is for the row, and then 5 is for the columns. You have a 3 by 5 array.
So generally, when you're one second. Can you hear me? Okay, so do you always have to have it column? Wait, you said row first, then column. It's always that way.
Yes.
Row and then column.
Yes.
Okay.
Do we need the name of the function?
Yes, we need name of the function. Okay, so we have the result type, and then the name of this function is averaged, right? And then we have the first parameter to be the array, and then we have the row count and then the column count. So we need to, so to find the average, we mainly need to calculate the total scored. And then at the end, we will divide it. So if you want to declare the total, okay, so here we will declare the total as 0, and then we will have a nested loop. And for the nested loop here, our goal is to add up all the score here. So it doesn't matter we do row first or we do the column first. So can we just start with row? And then we will go for the column. And then we will just add the entries to the total. So we'll always have row first, followed by the column. And once we find the total, we need to, so our answer will be total divided by, so number of entries will be number of rows times number of columns. So what we will do is we will first cast it to double of row times column. So it will return us the averaged.
You need those parentheses because if you didn't have them, it would do the division first.
Oh no, it will. Okay, so it will. So if you don't have the parentheses, you will have total divided by row and then multiplied by the column.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
Yeah, so you need to have the parentheses. So we will have the parentheses, so it will compute the row times column, and then it will do the cast. So it will turn row times column, or row and column are both integer. And we want to make it become a double. So we have integer divided by a double. So we will get the result to be a double type. So we will get the decimal part.
Okay.
So we did similar question with average before, right? So now we just put it into the function. Now next, we want to calculate. So this calculate average is you want to calculate the average for each student. But now we want to do it with the function. So if you look at the argument we have here, we pass in the averages. And then the average is an array. So we pass in the average array and the scores array. Right, and then the 3 and 5 is the row count and the column count. And then for the average, the capacity is the same as the column count. So we want to calculate the averaged and then put it into the average array. So how do we do that? So first we need to define the title line for this function. So what would the title line be? Do we need to return anything to this function?
No.
No. So what's the result type?
Void.
Void. And then we will have the name of the function. And what's the first parameter?
Double array.
So you will have double array. Okay, I see people asking why void. If you look at here, you don't need to return it anywhere, right? So this is a function asks you to do something to it. You don't need to return anything. It's asking you to calculate the average and then store it in the array. So you don't need to return a value to replace this function. Like once you run the function, you can move on. You don't need to return anything. Where here, the average function here, you need to return a double result. So you will see out the averaged. Where here, you will not see out anything, or you are not returning anything. So this is like a quick way to know what's your result type. Where you didn't set any value equals to this function, you are not see out, you are not printing out anything. Okay, so you know the first parameter is an array, and it's a 1D array since it's average. And then the second parameter, it's also array, but it's a 2D array. So you have integer array for score, so we can call it the array 2. So we'll leave the column count blank, and then we will leave the row count blank, and then we'll provide the column count 5. And then we will give the row count and then the column count. So this will be the title line.
So I just wanted to know what is the reason that we have to specify the second the column count but not the row count?
This is you need to tell C++ you have a 2D array. So this is how C++ understand that you have a 2D array.
Okay.
Okay, so now you need to calculate the averaged for each column. right? So you want to add up the score in the first column, calculate the average, and then store it in the first entry of your array. So you will have a for loop, and then you will want to go column by column. So you can have int, and then you can. So since we want to go column by column, our outer loop will be the column. And then every time when you go into, every time you go to each column, you need to calculate the total of that column. So you need to initialize it to 0. And then add each row entry to that, to the total. So for this one, you just add the row entry to the total. Okay, so once you add the total to it, then you will set.
Is that plus equals or equals?
It's a plus equal. Okay, so you will add those entry to total, and then you will set the cease entry, right? Because the entry of column is corresponding to the column, right? So first column is represented to the first entry of the name. So you have array of C will equal to the total you find divided by, and then you will cast by row. Right, since the row number tell you how many exam score you add up. So once you go through the whole table, the nested for loop, you finish the function. And since it's.
Wait, I thought we were doing the average for each student.
Yeah, we are doing the average for each student.
Okay.
So if you look at the function here, right, we're going through column by column, right? So when we go to column 0, what do we do? So we will initialize total to 0. And then we will add each row entry corresponding to that column.
Oh, okay.
So once we find the total, we will store the average. So we have the total divided by the row count. So we know how many number we add up.
So the
right?
row is the number of tests, basically.
So, yeah, so row is number of tests.
Okay.
So once we find the average, we store it in the first array. We have the double array, so we store it here because the first entry is where we have the average. So we'll store to it.
Okay, thank you.
So if you look at the function here, we pass in the array function so we can make change to it. And whatever change we make to it is permanent because array behave as call by reference. So whatever change we made in the function, it will affect the changes. It will affect the array outside of the functions. So we will do like column by column. So the code here is pretty much as we did before, but now we put it into function. Okay, now let's say now we want to find the maximal I, right? Maximum I will be the maximum index of whoever got the maximum average, right? So I have max, and then I pass in the the average array, right? So this is a 1D array, and then I have the capacity here. So for this max function, what's the result type?
Int.
Int, right? So we know the result type's int because you have the max I equals to this function. So you know you need to return an integer. And then for the parameter, you have first parameter to be 1D array, and this array is double type since you have averaged. Now, if you look at averages, is a double array. And then you leave the capacity blank. And then the second parameter or the second input is the capacity. Now you want to find the maximal index. And again, we need to initialize the answer to be 0. So let's say we assume the first entry will give you the maximum value. Then you can go through the for loop. I see people say I forgot the bracket for the for loop. Yes. Here, now it's good. Okay, so here we will start from 0, and then we will check each entry with the answers. So we are comparing the value, right? So we need to compare the current entry with the answer we have so far. So if what we have now is greater than what we have stored, then we need to update the answer. And once you compare all the entry, you will return the answer. And that will give you the index, where we keep track of the index. Any questions here?
So you're going to be comparing an int to a double. That's okay.
Oh
no, I'm sorry. Yeah,
we are comparing the
double.
double value, right? We are comparing the entry, but we are storing the index.
Okay.
Right, but the array I is the ith entry of our array. Right, so you are comparing each entry of your average array with whatever we have stored in the answer. And answer is an index.
Okay.
Right, so it's like what we have stored to be the maximum value so far. Right, so this array with the index give you the actual value. So you compare the actual value. So if what we have now is greater, then we update the index. Okay, now finally, we have a curve function. So what does curve function do is, if you look at it, we have the average array, and phi is the capacity. Now what this 10 does is it will add 10 points to the average for each student. Okay, so your first entry or your first parameter will be the array. The second is the capacity. The third one is the point, is the curve you will add it to the score, right, to the average. So what the title line gonna be here? What's the result type?
Void.
Void. Since you don't need to return anything. And then your first parameter will be a double array. Since averaged, if you look at averaged, look up, average is a double array. And it's a 1D array, so you have and since it's 1D, you leave the capacity blank. And then we will have the first entry to be the capacity, and the second entry will be the curve. You know what? Let me do it as EP, the actual point.
You're not allowed to have the function name be the same as a parameter.
You could. There's nothing wrong if you use the curved. I mean, you could use curve, but I don't want to confuse you. So here we do is pretty much you will go through the whole array and then add the amount of curve to your score. So you have a for loop. And
Wouldn't that create an interference with like a recursion?
no, because the curve here you used is an integer. Unless you call it with a function.
I think we should just name it something else.
So okay, so let's just call it actual credit. So easy. But you could use it because when you use the curved, C++ will know do you call it, or do you use it as a variable name, or do you use it as a function? Right, because you call a function, right after the function, then you have dependency. And in dependency, you will specify the argument. Where if you just have an array, if you just have it as a variable, after the variable name, you won't have dependency. So that's how C++ know, is it a variable or is it a function? But to avoid confusion, you should come up with a different name. Okay, so we will go through the array, and then we will do is for each entry, you will add the amount of actual credit to it. And that's the whole function. Any questions here in this for function? Okay, so if you look at it, right, we will expect that to print out average of all scored. And then it will calculate the average. And then it will find what's the index for the maximal average. And then it will print out the name of who got the highest average. Now, if you look at our data set, people who got the highest average it should be max. Okay, and then we will do a curved, and it will print out the name 2. So the second entry, so names 2 will be 0, 0, 1, 2. So it will be Jack's score. So it will tell you Jack got, this average will be the new average after the curved. Right, so it will tell you Jack here is a third column. So here we know Jack have 60 average. After the curve, it should be 70. Right, so we should have Jack got 70 after curved. Okay, so let's save it. And then let's see, can we compile it? There might be, okay, so I think that's just some typo there. I need to delete the space. Okay.
Yeah, sometimes when you like copy and paste, the characters aren't the same as like a
Yes,
blank.
so even if you like, it look like there's a space, but the
It's a different
character
character.
is different character. So that's why we'll compile my running to problem, because I just did this right before class, right? So I don't have time to type this out. So I copy paste from the notes I made here. Okay, I see people asking, will you need to create a program from scratch similar to this on the exam? Well, in the exam, I might give you a main program and ask you to implement a function. Or I can give you a function like this to just give the title line of a function. So instead of implementing the whole function, just write the title line. Okay, so I think now it works. So I compiled it. Now if I run it, so we see the average of all score is 60.6667. And then we have Max got the highest score. And then we have Jack got 70 after the curved. Good.
Yeah.
Now with the array, we can also have we can also make recursion function from it. Like the, let's see. Okay, so let's say we look at the max function here. Okay, so let's write this max function with recursion. Let's see. Okay, so let's say you have, let's say you averaged. It's 60, 50, 70, 40, and a 90. So here we have index 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4. So we put it into max average with the, and then we need to give the capacity 5. What do we expect the outcome gonna be?
90.
It will be 90 by 3. Since here we want to return the index,
Also index 4.
so it will be 4. Right? Now if I run that, can I have the same function? Now instead of the capacity to be 5, I lie to it and then say my capacity is 3. Now what would the answer become?
2.
It will be 2. It will give you index 2. So you can actually lie with the capacity, right? So this capacity here, instead of capacity, this value here we give it is, it's like you tell C++ how many number you want to process. So it don't always need to be the size. So with that, you can actually code it with recursion. Right, so you can just compare what's the maximum value of previous 4 number, and then you will check it with the last number. So I can quickly put it. And what's the base case? When the capacity is 0. Or what's better is like when the capacity is 0, then you will just return 0. So here we can have, so let me delete this. So we'll check if the capacity equals to 1, then you just return 0. Since you only have one number, and that number must be the maximum. Otherwise, you will check if, so you will check the easier version. So you will create int x. So let x to be the easier version, which you will calculate the max of the same array you pass in. Wherever the array, you will just pass in. And then with the capacity -1. Now you will check if your array of x, wherever you got for the easier version, is greater than the last one. It's greater than the capacity -1. Capacity -1 is the last entry. Then you will return x. Otherwise, you will return the capacity -1. So this will be the recursive version of this function.
What's like a good way to determine like when you can use recursion?
You can pretty much, you can always use recursion. Just find what's the easier version of it and how can you go from the easier version to the current one. So pretty much every function you did, you can write it as recursion. So the difference is with the array is for the array to do the recursion, usually you just reduce the size. So are we good here? So let me just quickly run this. If you see that we got the same answer, right? Give you max got the highest averaged. Okay, so I already post some exercise up on function, recursions, and array. And later today, I will also upload the exam protest. So it will be similar to the last exam. There will be 4 questions.
The things that you uploaded is on Blackboard?
Yes, it will be on Blackboard. So there is a folder called protest test. And I do believe some of you, because someone asked me the practice question in the office hour, that their lab instructor already gave the exam practice. So if you have the problem set from your lab instructor, it will be the same for the exam practice I give later. Yes, there will be 4 questions on the test. Any other questions? Would there be partial credit? Yes, so for the coding question, like ask you to implement the function. So depends on your answer, you will get partial credit on how much you answer the question or how much you get it right. Okay, I see people asking the grading, because I think in the exam one, I say 32 was a B. Okay, so the exam one, I give you like a rough breakdown of where your grade lies on. It does not implies to any specifically like grade point. I'm just saying if your grade is in that range, then your grade is roughly in the A range or B range. Because there's also other components. So I can only give you a rough class standard. Any other question? Okay, I see people asking for the recursive array, don't we do something like return max integer? Okay, so if you do return max, okay, so first of all, when you use a function and have the array as the argument, you will not have the data type and you will not have the bracket. So to use it, you only need the array name. So you will just have the average without the int, without the bracket. That's when you trying to declare a function. When you're trying to like write the function. Okay, and you don't just return the array and then x minus 1. So that will be the easier version. Right, so I assume your x is a size, then you're looking at your array and then with the capacity one smaller. That's the easier version, but to look at the maximum, you don't just look at the easier version. Right, you need to compare the easier version with the last number. So for the recursion, you need to look at what's the easier version and what's the relation between the easier version to your answer. So the exam will base on everything we learned so far, yes.